Hello everyone, this is the famous post-lunch session. Typically people fall asleep and that kind of thing, so hopefully you'll stay with me for the duration. So what I'm going to talk about today is an experiment that I've been doing for the last 18 months in using collective and artificial intelligence to create a little bit of a lab for the future of work. So the future of work is how we are going to work, how we're going to work together, how we're going to work with machines, and maybe how we're going to work at all. And so the perspective that I'm going to take here is obviously derived from what we do at MIT. I'm part of that team, and I work with the team you've seen today and the folks who are in Cambridge. But I also am, for most of my time actually, I lead innovation in a company that's a consulting company, 90,000 people. We work in the space of business process redesign and digital transformation of those big business processes. So think of things like fraud, right? Financial fraud, or think of the space of maintenance of jet engines and the analytics that need to go into that. So that kind of big environment, big infrastructural environment where you have literally thousands of people working on things. What we tried to do in the last year and a half, actually working in our executive management team, the CEO came to me one day and said, look, we have 90,000 people, we're going to have probably by the end of this year about 100,000 people. Many of those people are at risk of being displaced by automation. So first of all, that would create a lot of friction, but also it's a waste of talent. So what do we do with those folks? So the idea there was to then completely change how we do training in the company. Because training, if you think about it, upskilling and reskilling, you probably heard about it, is actually the foundation for people to be able to do new things. Okay? So let's start with that. That was 1.5 years ago, and I'm going to take you through a bit of a framework to use collective and artificial intelligence for doing reskilling and training, but you'll also see how it applies to many other situations. So let's start with what the future of work will be. Future work will have innovation at its core. People who are doing today robotic jobs, they're just human robots, they will be displaced. The robots will come, artificial intelligence will make those robots good enough to take a lot of those jobs away. Maybe not all of them, maybe not immediately, but those jobs will go away. The jobs that will stay are the jobs that require innovation. And by innovation doesn't necessarily mean what I do for a living, which is changing things completely. But it might actually be problem solving, sort of situations that we haven't seen before, people collaborating with each other and finding new solutions. That doesn't mean, by the way, invention. Invention is something that can be done by the usual gang of 3-4 people with 3 heads. If you want to see some of those, you go to MIT. We have a few of those. It's interesting to watch. But that's not the future of work. And actually, invention is not that many people, so we cannot be all inventors. But most of us, if we want to be relevant in a future where a lot of robots and machines and artificial intelligence is there, we will need to be able to do a little bit of innovation. Call it small I innovation. And so what is innovation? Innovation is invention. There's an element of that. There needs to be somebody who does that. But it's also shared knowledge and the collaboration that allows people to use that shared knowledge and apply to real situations. So when I look at our own processes, there's thousands of people who work, for example, at moderating content that happens to be on the social media. So those big processes require a significant amount of people coming together outside of the normal process and figuring out new things. So when you look at shared knowledge and collaboration, that gives you 2 big elements that we need to support and enable with collective intelligence and AI. If we do that, we will manage to actually keep people relevant, and we'll manage to actually use artificial intelligence for something that is useful for them. The problem is, actually many of you might have not fully entered the workforce yet, or might have entered maybe at the beginning, but for those of us who've been in the workforce for a long time, our management practices are not there yet. All I've talked about doesn't actually work very well with the management practices that we've been learning for the last 30, 40 years. I'll show you why. Org charts, they're not a good reflection of how work gets done. Documented processes, process workflows, the kind of things that Lean Six Sigma people do. They're not a good depiction of how innovation happens. It is a good depiction of routine processes. It's actually very often a good depiction, a good description of the work that the robots will take. It's actually not a great depiction of how people solve for problems. Machines themselves, all those new powerful machines, they're very often still used almost like in an assembly line where you have a robot that takes one part of the assembly line and does something with it. So they actually end up being siloed and do a very specific step. The other problem that we have is that leadership practices in general are pretty bad. They actually, if you look at how we incentivize people, the key performance indicators that we give to people to do their work, very often they're meant to encourage individual contribution. You've seen before, innovation doesn't happen through individuals. Individuals might do a little bit of invention, but innovation requires a lot of people. And that's actually one of the reasons why, as Chief Innovation Officer in my company, I actually care about enabling 90,000 people so that they can actually work a little bit, each one of them, on the innovative practices that we need to build. So that doesn't work. What works? So obviously we need to use all of those things. Those things are good. But what else do we need to build on top? And that's where collective intelligence comes in. We need to stop thinking about individuals as the unit of measure and the unit of design. That's actually the wrong paradigm. It's actually a paradigm that came from a world in which we had slow information flows, in which the innovation was a lot less combinatorial than it is today. Today you take many different people from many different businesses and you put them together and they create innovation. In the past it could be a subject matter expert and they could actually do the job. Today that's actually a lot less so. So we need to stop thinking about individual people but also individual machines as the focus, really. We need to stop missing, in English you say, miss the wood for the tree. In French you'd say, l'arbre cache le bois. And we need to start thinking about this. This is a forest. It's actually not a forest. This is one tree. It's called Pando. Does anybody know what Pando is? So Pando is a system. It's an ecological system, and we need to start thinking about understanding how to leverage systems. So systems in this case, I'll tell you why this is interesting. Pando is the oldest living organism on Earth. It has been around for 80,000 years. It is one tree. It's actually thousands of sprouts from one set of roots. It's actually about 40 hectares large. It weighs about 6,000 tons. It's actually one tree. And the reason why I think it's been around for 80,000 years has been studied by scientists for many, many years. We now know that trees actually, through their roots, share information with each other and they share resources with each other. By doing so, they become more resilient. They're able to fend off climatic conditions change, they fend off maybe the attack of parasites. And so even an organism that is not intelligent in the normal sense is actually able to adapt and be able to withstand conditions. Remember, 80,000 years ago, where that tree is, Homo sapiens wasn't there. So Homo sapiens actually came to Europe about 60,000 years ago. That thing actually predates, it was there before Homo sapiens came to Europe. That thing has been around for a long time. It is one tree. What can we learn from that, right? What can we learn from the oldest living organism on Earth? Well, that's a system. A system is a network of things that are connected to each other and share resources and information, right? It's actually very important to understand that, because engineering a system the way we would engineer a beautiful garden, even in France, right? You know, fantastic gardens. You take a lot of gardeners, you take a lot of architects. This thing is completely organic. It's been there for the longest time. Actually, the only threat to this thing has been around for 80,000 years, is us. The collective intelligence of, you know, sometimes people call this the Wood Wide Web. I didn't make it up, it's actually called the Wood Wide Web. The only threat to that is that collective intelligence is actually being overthrown by our own collective stupidity, because through climate change and the use of resources that we make around that space, that thing has stopped growing. It's actually happened in the last 20 years, 80,000 years, right? So we're talking about collective intelligence. So there are 4 components of a network intelligence that you can actually harness. This is a general framework, it's quite useful. I've used it actually in building this transformation for our learning and development organization. 4 elements, and this is about networks of machines helping networks of people. The first element is find the structure. You always have a structure in the system. So who are the nodes, who are the minds, and sometimes human minds, and sometimes can become machine minds. So identify them and start engaging with them. Second, create a set of incentives that allow them to engage with you. You need to put energy into the system. Third, create information feeders. Every community tends to become very insular and look at each other as opposed to looking outside. So you need to force information from outside in. And the 4th element is the collaboration environment. Creating a collaboration environment allows those parts to start interoperating with each other. Think about Pando. They have a network of routes. That's the collaboration environment. So how do you create new skills in a company of 90,000 people? Now forget about our company. Think about all other work that can happen in reskilling people at a very large scale. Okay? Which is actually one of the big jobs, one of the big challenges of our times. 3 principles. First, individuals have skills, but that's irrelevant. What matters is the skills of the combined teams, because the unit of measure has to be the teams. We don't do individual work all that much anymore, especially when you do innovation. So what are the skills that the teams need to have? And as a result, how do I train people to collectively, when they come together, manifest those skills? Which actually means training not everyone on everything, and by the way, especially spending time on training people on skills that allow them to interoperate. So those of you who've gone through design thinking, agile, storytelling, all those skills are super important for people to come together as teams. So number 1. Number 2, the network's knowledge is contextual and evolving. So like Pando, that thing adapts all the time. The old systems of reskilling are actually not as adaptive because they always require people at the top to change the curriculum, right? Whereas in this case, the change of dynamics of the system are much faster. So today I have a certain types of natural language processing that I use. In 12 months, I'm going to have different ones. So how do I ensure that that context, that knowledge evolves? And how do I ensure that when I teach adults, I keep examples from their business? So people who do financial fraud will need to understand how natural language processing helps financial fraud. I cannot explain to them how natural language processing helps content moderation on the websites because it doesn't resonate with them, it doesn't help them learn. So need to have context. And third, AI needs to help the human network function. That's its job. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So what we did, first thing that we did a social network analysis that really mapped the first 10,000 people of that 90,000 people. That little nebula that you see up there is 10,000 people. Each node connected with a number of other people. So the next picture down here is we started identifying who the key network nodes were. So who were the people who had knowledge about specific things? So understand what happened. We had 50 skills that we needed to create in the company. We actually took the decision of looking for internal experts in those skills as opposed to just using external experts like normally you would do. So through this network analysis, we identified both the people who had those skills and the people who had the network connections. The network connections are very important because it's actually that useful to have a very expert person who's not connected to everyone. Right? So through that method, we identified a number of people, and then what we did, we created ecosystems around them. So those masters and those gurus that you see here, those were the people we extracted from those networks. We gave them an exoskeleton around them through knowledge managers, through additional experts that we found for them, and through machines. I'll tell you in a second what we did. And so those people now, for each one of those 50 skills, we have one of those. Almost think about it like a specialized part of a brain, right? Our brain has specialized parts. We have 50 of those in that big collective brain of our company. Each one of those has specific skills, and it's actually tasked to pass on those skills to everyone else. The way they do it is that they interact with people, so they have external requests, and now obviously the people in the middle, 90,000 people against one person or two people, you know what the problem is. But when you have all those circles around those people, the ability of those people in the middle to actually interact with these 90,000 people increases by 5 orders of magnitude, right? And the other thing that does is every time you have an interaction of those, knowledge is captured, crystallized, and documented, and as a result, documented knowledge is actually very scalable. So if I put a paper out there that explains to people what natural language processing does for fraud, I can put it there, it can be read 1 million times, and the author doesn't need to do any minute of work additionally on that. So that is the structure, the core of the network structure. So back to those 4 pillars. First, we identified the structure, you just seen that. Actually, when we went to those nodes, to those critical nodes, one of the first things that we did was for them to understand what their nodal network role was, actually explaining to them how they could be a network player as opposed to being a normal subject matter expert. Second, information feeders. You'll see in a moment, we actually use quite a lot of natural language processing and other techniques to actually surface data and insights and information from outside of our company to feed these networks, these internal networks. And so the curation of knowledge from outside is very important. The third aspect is providing them with a collaboration environment. For example, those concentric circles, they have what we call collaboration hives. Hives are practically, in practical terms, are Microsoft Teams environments where those groups actually congregate, and we have one Microsoft Teams environment for each one of those groups. We also created what is called a learning opportunities marketplace. So when you learn things, especially in adult learning, it's always useful to have people do things with the knowledge that they have. That's actually the way, generally, people remember more when they apply their knowledge, especially adults absolutely need to apply the knowledge, otherwise they'll forget. So we created a marketplace of those learning opportunities in which all the subject matter experts can crowdsource a little bit of work from all the people who learn things. So they can actually go and post a little task, and the task is picked up by a learner, and the learner will do that task, and the learner will learn, and the subject matter expert gets actually the task executed. So that's a collaboration environment. And obviously we have a MOOC type environment where you have online courses and virtual things. And then incentives. We actually work on incentives quite a lot. Both extrinsic, for example, the learning is tied to promotions, as well as intrinsic, recognition, public recognition. So there's a lot more that goes into this. So what does AI do in all of this? 4 things. First, it helps people connect with each other. So it identifies the people and helps them see each other in the network, right? That's actually the first job that is done through AI. It's actually a lot of the network analysis done through random trees. So it's actually not very complicated AI that you use there. Then it does the curation. So we talked about all the knowledge out there in the world that gets curated and filtered through natural language processing and other environments. Third, it allows people to collaborate. So many of the sessions between learners and experts are virtual. So we use tools like Zoom and, again, Microsoft environments and a bunch of other things. Actually, AI, in that case, that actually optimizes the way people can collaborate with each other, even where the bandwidth is low, etc. It's actually very useful in the collaboration. And the last one is all other heavy lifting computation that needs to be done. So, for example, when you need to compute fraudulent behavior that happens on the platform, some people actually say, I've done all these things, but they haven't done it. We actually apply heavy computational machinery to it. Or we use automated data discovery that is machine learning driven to understand what segments of people learn in which way so that we can help the learners learn more. So artificial intelligence is super useful at doing that. With this in mind, so I give you an example of reskilling and retraining. What do we think that we can do with collective intelligence? We certainly know we can predict the future. So things like scenario planning and forecasting, they happen very well when you use collective intelligence. We can organize the future, which in this case was a reimagination of the operating model of our learning and development organization. But collaboration and problem solving, all the knowledge creation, so knowledge management, for example, this kind of environment can be done very well. Knowledge management can be done very well through this environment. And the last thing, we can resource the future. So as I said, 90,000 people, 30,000 of them might actually become obsolete in the next 5 years. If I can take at least 70% of them and give them a road to the future, that's actually very useful. We don't have all that many people who have the skills that we need. Obviously, there are a number of other things that can be done, from gig economy to scarce resource optimization. So what I wanted to leave you with is that the work that we've done in the last 18 months on 90,000 people has actually worked pretty well. We actually see the statistics and the numbers, and it's actually incredibly scalable. So I know that the infrastructure that we created now, I have 90,000 people, it can actually be in place for 200,000 people. It doesn't actually require all that many teachers more, right? And what also that gave us as a company, is actually gave 90,000 people, all those employees, a little bit of hope that they'll not become obsolete, right? That they can actually help each other get to the next level. Which, when you hear the narrative all the time of machines will be taking your job, etc., starts becoming a little bit, people become a little bit despondent and frustrated. And in this case, it was actually a message of hope, right? Collective intelligence, using artificial intelligence, can actually help people become more useful and more relevant and more successful in the future. Thank you.